Hello everyone, and welcome to another dev video for the 2D action-adventure game set in space, Bottled Sky. Last video, we went into a lot of depth into how I designed the camera motion to improve the feeling of movement and perception of the world around the shuttle. I finished off making the first interactable object, other than the shuttle, an asteroid, which for now is just a ball that you can push around using Unity's physics system. We'll get around to more interactions with the asteroid later. At the end of the last video, I teased a little bit about something called an entity spawning system, and how I wanted to clarify exactly what this means, but to put it simply, it's going to help me fill out the world with objects for us to interact with. So that's where we are going to start this video. Taking a look at the Trello board, if you're paying close attention, you might notice some changes since the last video. I've removed the more detailed version numbers from all the cards because I got tired of changing them every time I added something or moved stuff around. Another thing you'll notice is I've expanded the entity spawning system into 2 cards with lots of smaller tasks in each that define exactly what the systems should do. Firstly, an entity in this game is anything that could be interactable within the game world. This includes the shuttle itself, asteroids, enemies, NPCs, obstacles, and so on. But it does not include things like the background or the camera. Being interactable is not a hard requirement, but it gives you an idea of what is and isn't an entity. The first card has to do with managing the entities, and that means I want to keep track of them all because later I want to be able to disable entities that are far away and re-enable them when I get closer to them. Because there are no boundaries in this game and the player can go wherever they like, this is a necessary feature to help manage the performance of the game. It also has some gameplay benefits, but we won't go into that in this video. The second card has to do with spawning entities. Because the world is effectively infinite, we can't just fill the entire world with objects right away. This system will be designed to give us control over when and where entities should spawn. For example, basic asteroids will spawn close to us, and asteroids with rarer materials or tough enemies might spawn further away. With that explanation out of the way, let's get started on making this entity management system. The way I'm going to manage all of the game entities is by breaking the world up into chunks. In code, each chunk contains a list of entities. Each individual entity is responsible for communicating with the entity manager whenever it moves from one chunk to another. With that, I'll be able to easily get a list of all entities that are near the camera without having to iterate over all of them and do a distance calculation, and without having to do a collision check with a trigger on the camera. Then, I can disable all entities that are too far away to be important, which will drastically improve performance. There is one major downside to this approach, and that is that all of these entities are still loaded into memory. But if we run into memory problems later in development, there are ways to mitigate that too. By the end of the first stream, where I started developing the entity manager system, I had done nearly half of it. The second stream, however, was a little bit more troublesome. I ran into some bugs that slowed down progress quite a bit. But by the end of the day, those bugs were fixed and some progress was made. The third stream flowed a lot more smoothly. Final task completed. I love how it does all the wiggle on all of them, that's great. And the entity management system was completed, and I quickly made a start on the entity spawning system. By the end of the third stream, the entity spawning system was nearly half done. That task I just ticked off there mentions something called an entity profile. I think this might be a good time to explain more about how this game will be played to give some context for why these two systems are so important, and then how it relates to entity profiles. Here is the core gameplay loop. The player is at the hub. They're given the option to upgrade their abilities. This can come in the form of crafting new gadgets or upgrades to the shuttle. But they don't have enough resources to access these yet, so they have to go out and find them. The player ventures out beyond the safe confines of the hub to find the resources that they need. The player engages with a variety of systems to collect resources, which can come from things like breaking asteroids, defeating enemies, or helping NPCs in return for rewards. All resources are stored in a limited size inventory within the shuttle. Once the player has enough resources, they can return to the hub. At the hub, the player can spend resources on upgrades, store unused resources to free up shuttle inventory space, be given new tasks to undertake which will all lead to new paths to upgrades, and then the cycle repeats. One important detail is that each time a player completes this loop and upgrades their abilities, they then gain access to better upgrades which require more resources that are tougher to find. By tougher to find, I don't mean resources will be more hidden. Instead, the player will need to venture further away from the hub. Difficulty will be defined by how far away from the hub you are. Asteroids may take longer to break, enemies are tougher to fight, and NPCs will have harder tasks that they need help with. The rewards for taking on these more difficult challenges will also scale up based on how far away from the hub you are. This is the blueprint for game progression. Now back to entity profiles. These are a small collection of information for each entity type that I can plug into the entity spawning system. They contain information such as how far away from the hub it should spawn, what's the chance of it spawning, and how many should I spawn in one place, and so on. As we explore the world, we need to populate it with entities for the player to interact with. When the entity spawning system receives a request to spawn entities, it looks at all of the entity profiles and how far you are away from the hub to determine what entity is appropriate to spawn. For now though, the only entity we have other than the shuttle is the asteroid, and that can spawn anywhere. Enjoy this clip where the world is populated with asteroids as we fly around. So that concludes development of the entity management and spawning systems. Next up is drilling, which will be our first real means of gameplay interaction between the shuttle and the asteroids we made earlier. Firstly, I'm going to add a drill to the nose of the shuttle, which will have a trigger hitbox to detect if it comes into contact with any asteroid. Okay, I've got the trigger detection working now. If I bump into an asteroid with the drill, then you'll see this message appear. There you go, trigger detected. And this won't happen if you just bump into it with any other part of the shuttle. Anyway, next I want to lock the position and rotation of the shuttle and asteroid when this trigger is detected, and then gradually deal damage to the asteroid until it destroys itself. And then finally, once the asteroid destroys itself, I'll give control of the shuttle's movement back to the player. This was one point of failure in the first version of Bottled Sky. I got this feature working, but I built all of this drilling code into the same class that handles shuttle's movement because this feature overrides those movement controls. And I did this with a lot of code related to the shuttle and ended up with this giant superclass that was really hard to manage. A big reason for rebuilding Bottled Sky is to take a better programming approach and make sure I don't fall into those kinds of traps. I'll be looking into state machines as a code design pattern to help with this. So I've been sick on and off for the past month and a half, and the last few days haven't been too kind. I didn't want to record anything with a voice that was too nasally, so I've gone ahead and completed the whole drilling task. As you can see, the shuttle and asteroid are held in place when you start drilling. During this time, you can continue to accelerate, which will build up damage against the asteroid until it is eventually destroyed. If you stop accelerating for a second or two, then eventually the shuttle detaches from the asteroid and you regain normal movement again. I've also gone ahead and added a button that lets you instantly cancel your drilling action if you want.
Lastly, I've added a feature that gives you a speed boost whenever you break an asteroid. This little addition provides a huge improvement to the experience. Having to build up momentum after every drilling action gets tedious, so having a sudden burst in momentum is a big factor when it comes to making the plain act of gathering resources fun. I've added a temporary sprite for the asteroids and given them some starting momentum and rotation, and now the world feels much more alive than it did before. There's still a lot more I want to do to make the drilling mechanic feel much more impactful, but that will all have to wait until I get to version 0.2, where I polish all of these base mechanics. With all that over and done with, let's start adding some loot into the game. I've broken up all the item related tasks into 4 different cards. Inventory is about giving the shuttle a means to collect and store items. The Sum Items task will be about creating some things to collect from the asteroids when you destroy them. They will automatically get stored in the shuttle's inventory. And then in the next video, I will start on a crafting system and storage to place all of your excess items. I will probably have time to make the first enemy of the game too. In fact, the next video looks like it might be the finale for version 0.1, as shuttle health is a really quick and easy thing to add, because I've already done that for asteroids. The code for an inventory is generally very simple. It is basically just a list of items, but the quality of an inventory system is usually determined by its user interface, which I won't be doing until version 0.2, where I make an inventory crafting UI. I worked on the inventory system on and off in a day and didn't record a time lapse, so here is the final result. I can hit a button, and for debug purposes it will add some copper to the inventory. Later I'll have asteroids dropping this item instead. You can hold up to 99 copper in a single inventory slot, and once that's full it will overflow into a new slot. That number can be changed on a per item basis, so I could decide that another item can fit 10 in a slot, or another item that isn't stackable only fits 1. Copper is really common and might be something you'll collect a lot, so 99 seems generous enough for now. Currently, the shuttle's inventory has 10 slots. I will likely have this be something you can upgrade later. I can also hit another button, and for debug purposes, it will remove some copper. I've chosen to have the remove function take items out starting from the last slot. That way, if you like organizing your inventory in a certain way, it caters to that. I rewrote the inventory and Sum Items task on the Trello board to be more specific about their features. All of the inventory tasks are now done, and we can move on to the next task, which I've renamed Loot Tables. Alright, that about wraps up loot tables. I might make a custom inspector for this later, or switch to using a spreadsheet for this data, because it's a little bit unwieldy with how it is now. The way it works is each entry in this list is rolled as a potential drop. The first drop has a 100% chance to drop exactly 1 copper. The second entry has a 50% chance of dropping nothing or 1 to 2 additional copper. And finally, the third entry has a 30% chance of dropping a single chunk of iron. The reason behind this design is for the potential chance that you'll get lucky and successfully pass all rolls on the loot table, and then you'll be showered in items. The alternative would be to use weights for all of these, but making one drop more common would make another rarer, and that's a balancing headache I don't think I need. And that's where I'll end the video. If you got this far, then consider liking the video, and if you want to see more, then subscribe and bell to be notified of future videos. Check the description for a link to the Discord server where you can chat with me and get updates about when I go live on Twitch. Thanks for watching, That's all for now, and I'll see you later.